Welcome, my name is Lisa Rotz. I am the program coordinator for the Rangeland Research Institute at the University of Alberta. And I'm also a volunteer for my section for Society for Range Management. And just to give you a little background, this is our fifth of six webinars. I'm losing track. The Society for Range Management has partnered with the Rangeland Research Institute as well as Montana State University to offer some winter-spring webinars this year. And Anabel Dombro has agreed to give one of those webinars, which you're attending today. So we are recording them. We will be posting them on our website, posting them to YouTube and sending around the link. So if folks have missed them, you can still view it or send it to people you know. And I will I'll introduce Anabel here quickly. So thanks again for joining us. Anabel Dombro is a master's student at the University of Alberta, and she's studying with Dr. Edward Bork as her supervisor. And really grateful to be working with Anabel. Anabel has the unique position of starting this project way back in 2020. So she has collected the data right from the very beginning of this project and then eventually took it on as her master's project. So that's been really valuable to have the continuity of having Anabel work on this. So she's going to be presenting her talk on annual bromegrass control using indaziflam in Alberta rangelands. And then this is looking at 3 years of data following treatment. And I will let you take it away, Anabel. Thank you so much for joining us. And please hold your questions till the end. And we can have you unmute and ask your questions to Anabel.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Lisa, for the introduction. And hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here and thanks for coming. So yeah, I guess let's get started. So annual brome grasses are known to be undesirable plants and can reduce ecosystem function. By annual brome grasses, I mean brome grasses with annual life cycles. The most common one is downy brome, Bromus sectorum. We also have other species in Alberta, like Japanese brome, and in this picture at our site, so there's a lot of corn brome. And these species can reduce the quantity and quality of desirable forage for cattle, like livestock and also wildlife. They can also reduce biodiversity of the area of the ecosystem, and they can be pretty flammable as well. And the extent of these plants in North America is very large. So these annual brome grasses are considered to be the most spatially significant and spatially extensive plant invasions in North America. They are found in every state of the United States and every province in Canada except for Newfoundland and Labrador. And they seem to be spreading northward. They've historically been less abundant. So historically, they've been very abundant in the Great Basin of the United States, where they have changed some of the sagebrush ecosystem into annual grasslands, which has resulted in more fire, and then that results in less sagebrush and more annual grasses. And they're also found commonly in the Great Plains, mainly the western United States. And then here's a map from Alberta Environmental Parks of where they have identified annual brome grasses from 2003 to 2018 during their range health assessments. And so they found 530 occurrences, and there's a high density near the border and a little bit less as you move north. But I think landowners and managers and ranchers and people who care about grassland conservation in Alberta, there's growing concern about how this is going to be affecting our grasslands and rangeland. So I wanted to go over some of the common species of annual bromes in Alberta because even though the most common one is Bromus sectorum downy brome, we also have some other species as well that we can see here. So I already talked about the corn brome, that's Bromus sclerosus. And then bromus japonicus is Japanese brome, and those are the ones that I've seen like at our sites. And just for like a quick ID, the bromus tectorum is here on the left, and you can see that has these thinner, longer glooms. So glooms are the bracts at the bottom of this spikelet, which is the flower unit of a grass. They have straight awns and longer awns. So awns are these like appendages, these long appendages. And then compared to the bromus sclerosus, that's the corn brome, it has sort of inflated looking spikelets. It has a thick hyaline margin on the lemmas, so that's this translucent part here, and it has these wavier awns. And here's a picture of those species in the field at our one of my sites, and you can see like on the left is the downy brome and on the right is the corn brome. They look pretty different in the field, and they're also different colors here because the downy brome might be a little bit of an older plant. And then on the right is just an example of a seedling of an annual brome. So they all look very similar as seedlings, but they have this hair on the sheath around the stem, so that can help to identify the seedlings. And just in comparing the bromus japonicus and bromus sclerosus, because those look very similar to each other, the bromus sclerosus here on the right has more inflated looking spikelets, so that just means they look more plump, and it has a thicker hyaline margin, that white margin here, compared to the Japanese brome on the left. And we also have these 4 other species of annual brome in Alberta that you could potentially see, which are bromus saccharinus, that's rye brome, bromus diandrus is ripgut, bromus comitatus meadow brome, and bromus hordeaceus soft brome. So yeah, I haven't really seen those ones myself before, but they can look very similar, except the ripgut looks pretty different with the longer awns and spikelets. And then we also have like other annual species that could become problems in Alberta, such as medusa head. We are beginning to see that, and ventinata potentially, and then some like forbs like kochia. So if these are a problem and we want to control them because they're not like helping us meet the goals of what we want for the land, what are the control options? It doesn't seem that grazing is a very good control option for annual brome grasses, because these plants, they senesce very early in the season and become unpalatable. So they're basically unpalatable for a lot of the grazing season. And I've seen at my sites, like in this picture, some clumps or tufts of brome grass that looked like cattle had sort of like pulled it out and then spat it back out, and they seem to be avoiding these areas and didn't really like want to be eating that. And according to this meta-analysis in 2017, they didn't find that grazing overall was a very good strategy for controlling annual bromes, and that generally herbicides provided better long-term control. So in terms of herbicide, we have like pretty limited herbicide options for controlling these, especially in Western Canada, because first of all, most of our herbicides are registered for cropland and not natural areas. And then one herbicide that they've been using for annual brome control in the United States, called imazapic, is not registered in Western Canada. Also, there's one paper that has compared indaziflam, which is the herbicide I'm going to be talking about, and this imazapic, and they found that indaziflam had basically reduced brome better than imazapic did. And then also there's like the growing problem of herbicide resistance. So There's been herbicide resistance of annual bromes to group 1 and 2 herbicides. Recently seen some resistance of annual brome to glyphosate even. And so there's like sort of like we want to look for new like modes of action and new herbicide. So indaziflam is a potential control tool for annual brome grasses. It is a new to like rangeland herbicide. So it was registered for use in natural areas and rangelands in the United States a couple of years ago. It's made by Enview, and it's called Rejuva. So it hasn't been registered for use in Canada yet, for rangeland or natural areas, but it's supposed to be registered very soon for that. Right now it's registered in Canada for use on like fence lines and roadsides and industrial areas. And so it's cellulose biosynthesis inhibiting herbicide that prevents seedlings from establishing. So it prevents the like radicle and the coleoptile of germinating seeds from growing properly. And it's not meant to target already growing plants. So that's why it can be used for controlling annuals in perennial like plant communities and rangelands. So when it's sprayed, it needs precipitation and moisture to get down into the soil past the litter layer, and then it's supposed to control the seed bank of the soil, and it's supposed to stay in the top like layer of the soil and avoid the deeper perennial roots. So it is a persistent herbicide, and it has a long half-life, and is not very water soluble, which could potentially provide multiple years of control. So I think the idea is that one application could maybe deplete the brome seed bank, considering that the seed bank of brome is thought to last about 3 to 5 years. And there have been a couple of field studies done in Colorado where they found that indaziflam could provide high levels of control of annual brome, and that there were low impact to perennials in the field in terms of their abundance and diversity. So we want to see how this will control brome and affect our plant community in a more northern mixed prairie where we have different climate and plant communities. So we have potentially like more precipitation here and colder winters, more organic matter in our soil, all of which can affect how herbicide absorbs in the soil and degrades. And then we have more C3 plants, and also that species corn brome, which has not really been studied. So yeah, we set up 2 sites in the dry mixed grass prairie in southern Alberta, close to the border of Montana. We had one site near Aden, Alberta, on Orthic brown turnip, and then we had one site at the Pinhorn Provincial Grazing Reserve on Solonetsig brown turnip. And here's a picture of the Pinhorn site with grazing exposure and our small plots inside of there. And both of the sites had about 4.7% organic matter in the top 10 centimeters of soil. So that was like pretty high compared to other sites. And the dominant native plant species at our site was definitely western wheatgrass was the most dominant, and then we also have some June grass, needle and thread. We have Sandberg's bluegrass, which you can see in this picture here. We had dryland, sedges, blue grama, and then we had a few forbs, but overall at our sites there's pretty low forb cover. But for the ones that we did have, we have like pasture sage and scarlet mallow, and some like potentilla and arnica species. So at each of the 2 sites, we had a randomized complete block design with 4 reps, and then we applied herbicide in either the fall or the spring. So the fall application aimed to target brome prior to its germination, because annual bromes are thought to mainly have winter annual life cycles where they germinate in the fall, then overwinter as like a rosette and resume their growth early in the spring. Then senesce early, and then they're kind of dormant throughout the summer and resume their growth in the fall again. And also their early spring growth that kind of can help, like that can make them competitive with the native perennials, because they can, since they start growing so early, they can take advantage of like early spring moisture and nutrients. But anyway, yeah, that application aims to target brome prior to its germination, and then the spring would have been applied once the brome was already growing for that season. And then we had 4 rates of indaziflam, which were 0, 0.51, and 2 times the US recommended rate of indaziflam, which is 75 grams of active ingredient per hectare. And then we sampled the biomass and cover of the brome or just the plant community at its peak growth in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And then I've done my analysis, a lot of my analysis using log response ratios, which is the natural log of the treatment biomass divided by the untreated control plot biomass for a given rep. I've also done some analyses like analysis of variance and NMDS, which I'll talk about later. Okay, so here is brome biomass 2 years post-treatment. So in our first year post-treatment, we did not see treatment effects in any of the treatments. So it could be that the herbicide was sprayed to, after brome had germinated, or it just that it got, there wasn't also like any precipitation following our application, so it might have gotten trapped in the litter and taken more time to get down into soil and have contact with the seeds. So yeah, but then my 2 years post-treatment, we did see treatment effects. So in this year, all the fall treatments reduced biomass at both of our sites. So at the Pinhorn site, those spring treatments were just not as consistent and in reducing biomass. And then looking at the fall 75 gram treatment at both the sites, which is the recommended rate treatment, at the Pinhorn site. Sorry, I also forgot to like explain this graph. So I'll do that now. On these graphs, the sites are on the left, and so I have the Pinhorn site at the top, and then the Eden site at the bottom. Then within each site, I have the fall treatments and then the spring treatments, and then within each season of treatment are the rates going from lowest to highest. And this is showing % change in brome biomass as a result of indaziflam, and it's showing the mean and the 95% confidence interval. So here, this dashed line is just showing 0, so that would be no change in biomass. So yeah, looking at the fall 75 gram treatment, at the Pinhorn site, we saw like a 9 to 96% reduction. And then at the Eden site, we saw a 84 to 98% reduction. So that one was pretty high. At the Pinhorn site, it was a little bit more variable in this year. And then by 3 years post-treatment, what we saw was that all treatments at both sites reduced brome biomass between 89 to 100%, except for the lowest indaziflam rate, which is the 37.5 gram rate. So that one also provided control, not control reductions, but just not as much or as reliably. So yeah, we saw high levels of control at that 75 gram rate. And it didn't really seem that the 150 gram double rate offered much of a benefit compared to the single rate. And we also, according to the analysis of variance, there was no difference between the fall applied treatments and the spring applied treatments in this year. So any differences from the previous year. They kind of seemed to even out in this year, and it didn't really matter anymore whether it was sprayed in the fall or spring. Here's the native perennial grass biomass. So what we saw was that the perennial grass biomass could potentially increase under higher indaziflam rates, especially when it was applied in the fall. So this is native perennial grass biomass from 2021 and 2022, which were the 2 years that we saw treatment effects in terms of reduction of the brome. So yeah, we saw like especially increases at our pinhorn site, which could be because there was like a higher amount of brome there initially. So it seemed that when there's less competition from the brome, that like the brome is being reduced, then maybe there's the perennials are released from competition, they can increase in their biomass. And we just like notably did not see that there were any decreases in perennial grass biomass. So either stayed the same or could potentially increase. Here's the native plant community composition. So here's an NMDS ordination of the plant community composition. So that's non-metric multi-dimensional scaling. And for these ordinations, the axes do not really have a lot of meaning for interpretation of a graph. But each of these dots is a treatment plot with its composition, and then the closer dots are to each other, the more similar they are in terms of their composition, and the farther apart, the less similar they are. And then the different colors are the different treatments. And so like really kind of comparing the untreated control plots to the treatment plots, and it doesn't seem that there was any like separation of treatments. They're all pretty mixed together. And so it didn't seem that the treatments were really affecting the plant community composition compared to the control. And that was also what the PERMANOVA, the permutational analysis of variance, said as well. Okay, here's some seed germination results from 2021, which is 21 months after treatment. So in 2021, we took soil cores from all the fall treatments, and then I monitored the germination and emergence of the seedlings in the greenhouse for 8 months. And so here's perennial grass seedling emergence at the Pinhorn and Aden site. And then the different colors are the different rates of herbicide. So at the Pinhorn site, we saw that there was some reductions in seedling emergence at the highest rate. And then at the Aden site, there was less emergence at the 75 and 150 gram rate. And then for Forbes seedling emergence, there was like less emergence or almost no emergence at the 75 and 150 gram rates. So you're not really supposed to seed like after you use indaziflam because it prevents all seeds from germinating. And even 21 months after treatment, it was like the seeds were still not being recruited from the seed bank. So really it's like the idea of this herbicide is that you should probably use it before your plant community gets to the point of like no return, because it's good to have those already growing plants that can fill in once the brome is gone. Okay, and finally, I will talk about my root biomass study, the greenhouse study. So this study was looking at how indaziflam affects the root biomass of growing perennial grasses, because there isn't really a lot known about this, and in the field it's hard to decouple the herbicide effects from competition effects. And so there's also not a lot known about the cellulose biosynthesis inhibition mode of action and how that really affects like already growing plants' roots. So for this study, we took soil from our Pinhorn site and brought it back to the U of A, like untreated soil. And then I grew 4 species of grasses, the most common grasses at our sites. So I grew western wheatgrass, needle and thread, June grass, and Sandberg's bluegrass. Grew them individually in these pots for 2 months. And then after 2 months, we sprayed them with 75 and 150 grams of indaziflam, and then let them grow for 2 more months, and then measured the root biomass and above ground biomass. So what we found was that the total root biomass of growing perennial grasses declined with increasing indaziflam rates for the western wheatgrass and the needle and thread and the June grass. Not really for the Sandberg's bluegrass. That one was very small and didn't really grow very well in the greenhouse either. And then for above ground biomass, we also saw that the above ground biomass could decrease in these greenhouse conditions. So for the western wheatgrass and the needle and thread, and then for the June grass at the highest rate, and not really for the Sandberg's bluegrass. So this was a bit different than like what we saw in the field, which was some increases in perennial biomass. I mean, those measurements were taken 3 years after treatment in the field, and then here these plants are pretty young. There's also differences in greenhouse studies compared to the field, so there might not be like that litter layer. The herbicide might get lower into the soil or deeper into the soil because there's not that litter layer. There's more frequent watering. So overall in the field, it seemed that the indaziflam was good because it was reducing the brome and improving the perennial biomass. But in the greenhouse, we did see some effects. So yeah, overall, what we found was that indaziflam can have a long-term efficacy at reducing annual brome in the northern mixed prairie at both lower and higher rates, and that the higher rates were more consistent than the lowest rate, the 37.5 gram rate. And I will be sampling again this upcoming summer, so we'll get even more another year of data and see the effects from this year. We found that the timing of application was not critical given the long-term nature of the herbicide. We found that the growing perennials were not negatively affected in the field. And we saw that the levels of brome control in the field were sufficient to elevate perennial grass biomass, presumably due to reduced competition. And thank you to our collaborators at the Range Management Branch of Alberta Environment and Parks and Pinhorn Grazing Reserve and Ross Ranch for our study sites. And thanks for funding from Alberta Environment and Parks and NVU. And to everyone who's helped out on the study, especially Tanner Broadbent and Amanda Miller, who helped set up the study and sample with us. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anabel. And we have some time for questions. And we're not a huge group, so if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question, Anabel is happy to take those, or if you would rather, you're welcome to put something in the chat and I can read it out for Anabel.
It was good to see the, I guess, the biomass production less of an issue in the field than in the lab. But I guess, how did that compare if we know that information, do we know how it compared to imazapic? Was there, I know we didn't study imazapic, but was there, did you look into differences between the two in terms of that?
Yeah, I haven't really, because we're not allowed to use imazapic, I think, here. And also, just like I have seen, there is a study comparing in imazapic and indaziflam in terms of their control. I'm not sure if, I think they also might have compared like injury and perennial biomass as well, but I can't remember compared to imazapic.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Anabel, great presentation. That was super interesting. I'm just wondering, at your sites, were there other invasive plants besides the annual bromes that were present? And did you see any effects of the herbicide on that?
No, this was the only invasive and annual plant at our site. So all the others were perennials. I did see like one annual come up out of our seed bank, which was like Descarania, Sophia, but yeah, this was really the only one. But it's supposed to help like control any annual species.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Anabel, got a question for you about the perennial biomass increasing in the field. Did you see a species effect on that? Was there one species or a couple species that were more positively impacted than others? Was it a similar trend as you saw in the greenhouse experiment?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I didn't look at it at the species level. I only looked at it as that group, but that's like something that I should look into, and so thank you.
I guess to jump off of Darren here, I guess, was there really, reason for the difference between the lab and the field? Obviously, it's good that it seems to be less impactful in the field in terms of biomass reduction, but curious result nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, it could be because of the competition effects in the field. Like, so when the brome is being reduced, then there's more like water available and nutrients available for the other species. But also just in the greenhouse, it's a more, effects can be amplified in the greenhouse because you're watering more, the herbicide might be getting down deeper into the soil, things like that. But it seemed that if there are any direct impacts to the plants, the competition effects in the field were still enough that they could still increase.
Great, thank you.
And yeah, from the chat, the active ingredient is called indaziflam.
I could comment on the field and greenhouse activity if there's an interest in that, but I'll leave that up to the presenter to decide.
Yeah, that would be great.
Typically with, this is Ron Fitzgerald. I worked with research and development with a number of multinationals for 40 years, and I work as a consultant now, but with soil active products like indaziflam, and I was with cyanamide when we had imazapic as well, but that, as was mentioned, that couldn't be registered in Canada. But typically you get a lot greater activity in the greenhouse out of herbicides than you do in the field. But with the soil actives, when you take something like indaziflam and you start flushing it down into the roots with the type of watering that you need to keep the plants alive in the greenhouse with the high levels of evapotranspiration, you tend to flush it down into the root zone and it becomes even more active than a foliar herbicide. So with foliars, if we're comparing field to greenhouse, we would usually look at the greenhouse activity being twice what it is in the field with a foliar product. With something like indaziflam, where it's soil active and you flush it into the roots, if you don't apply enough water to flush it right out the bottom of the pot, then you could end up looking at even more activity or possibly none. I had a question about the process to commercialization. This data is great, and you have enough data to approach the registrant and have this added to the label. Is there a process for doing that? Because in my experience, the tendency tends to be to have a lot of the research published, and it's great that you're getting a master's degree out of this. This is terrific work, and we need more weed scientists out there in the field looking at these kind of invasive species problems. But I tend to see a lot of the research just sit there and it doesn't get processed in the format it needs to go to the registrant and get a label of support and a proposed label for submission to the Pest Management Regulatory Agency. So just wondering what the process might be. And this isn't necessarily for Anabel to answer, just a general question.
Yeah, if anyone or like Lisa wants to comment or anyone knows more about this, but I know that our study is being like used, I think, for helping to get this project registered in Canada.
Hey, Anabel, I could maybe potentially speak to that.
Go ahead, Vicky. Thank you for popping in.
Hi, Vicky Maloney here. I'm the stewardship manager for NView for Canada. So we are currently in the process of getting Esplanade, which is our indaziflam product here in Canada, registered for range and pasture. So we do have all the data, including Anabel's and a lot from the US study. So we have all of the data we need, and the registration is in the works, but it takes about at least 33 months until that can get approved. So we're looking at hopefully August of 2025 if all goes well.
Thanks very much. It's good to see that's moving along. It's just a shame to see some of this research not being taken to commercialization, but it sounds like you have a good process. I do a lot of work with the PMRA and minor uses, and it's a lot of work doing the background gathering of data and all of the data summarization and DACO table formatting that the PMRA needs. So good to see that you're on this.
Yeah, there's definitely lots of interest in having access to the active ingredient. Anyone else for questions for Anabel?
Yeah, Lisa, I got another question for Anabel. Anabel, did you find a difference between the three species of brome, the corn brome, Japanese brome, and downy brome? Was there a different control level of indaziflam on those three species?
So at our sites, we had like mainly the corn brome, and then a little bit of downy brome, and we put it together, and we looked at it as a category of annual brome. So I haven't looked at the difference in those two species. Yeah.
Is from your lit reviews, is there anything in the research that shows a difference in control, or are they pretty well even?
Yeah, I from my literature review, I've seen that for like comparing Japanese brome and downy brome, that they were very similar in terms of their control, and other annual species as well. It seemed that they were all being controlled by the indaziflam.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question about the target use pattern or location of use. Is this being designed, Annabelle, to go into rangeland and pasture, improved pasture, hay fields? Is there a distinction between the areas in which these weeds need to be controlled?
That might also be a question for Vicky and crew who are taking the registration forward. Vicky, do you have any comments?
So yeah, it's called rangeland and pasture. It's for the PMRA. They specialize. They call it crop group 17. And so within crop group 17, there's a number of different grass species, and most of all of our common grass species in Canadian, Western Canadian rangeland and pasture are on there. So yeah, it's a number of different species, but they're all in our Canadian rangelands. Does that answer your question? So it is specific. So right now it's registered for industrial sites like the railways, rights of ways, that sort of thing, but there's no grazing restriction. So it can still be grazed and that sort of thing. So we know it works, and all of the species that are on the current label, on the Esplanade label, will still be on the label. So there's no actual change to the species on the label. It's just going to be a use case addition to the current Esplanade label.
Okay, and you're going to be able to, so you have a livestock feeding statement for crop group 17 for the active then?
Yeah, so there's no grazing restriction whatsoever.
Okay, perfect.
And I guess I have a question for Vicky as well. Does that include tame pasture or improved pasture species? And maybe I misunderstood what your answer was earlier, like for introduced forage species.
Yeah, it will work. Of course, there's the seeding restriction, right? So you cannot seed once you've treated with indaziflam. So it will restrict any growth of seeds for at least 2 years. And so, yeah, but if you have a well-established perennial population already present, they will outcompete and will take over.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question in the chat from Scott. What is the severity of annual brome encroachment in Alberta? And is there evidence that annual bromes can displace native species and create a new steady state the way they have in the Great Basin? I know Darren has taken a stab at answering that as well, but hear your thoughts on that, Annabelle.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of research about the severity of annual brome in Alberta yet. Like, it's pretty much like I have that one map from Alberta Environmental Parks, but we don't really know. I don't think we know the extent of the invasion in Alberta. It hasn't been as studied as it has been in the US, because I think it's more recently become a problem. I think there is evidence that it can displace native species, but there's not evidence that it can create a new steady state yet, like in the Great Basin. So I'm not sure about that, but what I've seen is that it seems that it can fluctuate a lot from year to year, like the amount of brome that you get. So in 1 year it could be very, very high. Like in some of those pictures you can see like the whole field is covered in brome, but then in a year of really low moisture in the spring it can be very low, and the grassland almost looks normal again, but then the next year it could be like very bad again. So I think that's like another reason why it might not be good to rely on that species for forage and such. So I guess to me it's like just that you might not want to be relying on that for cattle, but I'm not sure that other than that, yeah.
I can speak a little bit on this too, is that I've worked in special areas number 2 around Empress for the last probably almost close to 10 years, and probably the last 5 years we've seen a significant increase in downy brome and corn brome and Japanese brome on native prairie. And where I see this being an issue is that it's got into cultivated annual fields, and farmers don't have a control option for annual cropland. So it's able to drop seed and move in the field very quickly. And because there's no control options for annual crop, there's a constant seed bank or seed source to push onto native prairie. And some of the work that we did in Del Bonita on a project is that we saw, I know a lot of the research says that the annual bromes act as winter annuals and germinate in the fall and overwinter and grow in the spring and then drop seed and they go dormant. What we were seeing in Del Bonita was that it was dropping seed, and that seed crop was germinating within weeks, and it was germinating and growing again, and it was dropping seed. We were having 3 flushes of brome germination and growth in a growing season.
Well,
Yeah, I guess I can expand on just my comments a little bit there. I'm the public lands grologist for the far south end of the province, so where it's where it's most rampant, and I've been here for about 10 years. And yeah, we've certainly seen an increase in it over that time, and it's certainly increasing. It's certainly an issue, and there are spots where it's quite bad, quite an issue. But to the degree that it's in the Great Basin, don't think we're there yet. But in relation to the Great Basin, yeah, I don't think it's as widespread, but we certainly have it spreading further and wider, and it's not going away. It's only going to get worse.
yep. And
Yeah,
as Lysandra has posted as well, we're seeing it as far north as Edmonton as well. So it's definitely heading northward. And I'd like to comment too that at our sites, which don't seem particularly degraded, we're seeing quite a high level of invaded area in places where we would, probably evaluate a pretty good range health condition. So it's not like heavily disturbed areas that it's moved into. It's established in quite what we would say healthy rangeland, which is probably, that's quite concerning.
I can add a couple of comments to that, Lisa, as well. On the last summer tour we had for our section, which was Rick's tour at a Havre, I was at the time convinced that healthy rangeland could withstand invasion by downy brome, until we were out on the field site there and I saw a downy brome plant growing up in the middle of a little club moss clump. And that convinced me at that point that if little club moss cannot prevent germination and establishment, then healthy rangeland can't either. And what Rob was saying about we don't have it as bad as the Great Basin yet. This should be a little bit of an eye opener to people that if we don't do something about it, we will have a problem like it is in the Great Basin. It's not if, it's when.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Darren. It is when, at this rate anyways. And yeah, it doesn't care. Native range, healthy range, it'll find a way.
I'm curious, was there any impact on native forbs? So if you're looking at a restoration situation where you wanted to remove the downy brome, I would be assuming that it also impacts forb germination, and you'd have to wait about 2 years before you could seed any native forbs in there as well, if you're looking at that type of situation. Or did it reduce any forb cover, even though it was low at the sites?
Yeah, it would affect the forb seeds as well if they're using seeds for like reproduction. But yeah, I mean, I didn't see in terms of like cover, I don't think there was any difference in the forb cover because it was very low at our site, so that's also kind of hard to tell. But Yeah, I was just looking at the biomass like yesterday, and it didn't seem that there were any differences in the biomass of the native forbs in any of our treatments. So yeah, that's like for the already growing ones, but it would affect the seeds.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think there's some evidence to suggest that it will also work on things like kochia, which we have problems of in southern Alberta with, you know, lots of populations that are group 1 and 2 resistant and glyphosate resistant. So similar kind of story. Yeah, lots of comments in the chat. Thank you about where people are seeing invaded areas with downy brome, Japanese brome throughout the province.
If any of the you guys are interested in running additional trials on these sites that you're talking about, you could reach out to me. We're always looking for more efficacy data on Canadian rangelands for indaziflam for this particular product. So if you are interested, I could put my contact information in the chat and you can reach out to me directly.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Vicky. That'd be great. Anyone else for last few questions for a Friday afternoon?
I have a quick question for Vicky, and this one could be just my lack of knowledge, but when you're saying for Esplanade to be registered for rangeland and pasture, does that include like conservation areas for grass, like what we would just call like a grassland, like a native grassland kind of thing? Does that encompass that, or is it more of like a, I guess, agricultural side?
Yeah, it would include native grasslands as well.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Vicky. All right, well, if there's no further questions, I'm sure everyone would like to continue on with their Friday afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for today. We are having our last webinar, the Society for Range Management International Mountain Section webinar on April 26th. And that will be an evening one. It's a Wednesday evening, 7 to 8 p.m. And Dr. Wiffles will be talking about using new technologies in managing rangelands. So please, you're welcome to join us for that. If you're not on my email list for SRM, you're welcome to email me as well to get on that list. So thank you so much again, Anabel, for joining us today. And yeah, hope to see you at our next and final webinar.
Yeah, thank you everyone for the questions.